Welcome everybody to Project You, Project Me, the FTG guide to self-belief and self-coaching. Why not come along and listen to people like you, people like me, leaving legacies for your future. So welcome everybody to Project You, Project Me, the Forces Transition Group's own podcast, in which what we do is we look at the lives of people who have maybe served, people in sport. We look at transition, and we look at other people's views on how maybe transition could go, what they felt, all that kind of good stuff. And today I've got a good friend in Mick Fleming. How are you, Mick?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, good. Glad to be here.
Fantastic, and it's great to see you as always. And
Like looking in a mirror.
yeah, absolutely. I was just looking at that before we started, and I thought, I bet somebody comments on that. But hopefully, people have a bit of fun with that and take a lot away from today, because I know you've got a lot of experience and a lot of things to say. So, but first of all, Mick, I think it's important that people know a little bit about you. Some people clearly will know who you are, many won't. So tell me about Mick, when you joined, what you joined, all that kind of good stuff, because it's all interesting for those who have served, especially.
Yeah, I anticipated this question and thought I'd probably tell you when I left. Because if I say when I joined, 99% of people will switch off. So
Yeah.
I was born in Huddersfield, brought up in Sheffield, and joined the Royal Signals. As per the instruction given to me by the recruiting desk sergeant, who thought I would be a perfect fit, only to find I was a slightly oval peg in a round hole, so a little bit uncomfortable for both of us at times. But I served for 35 years and left in 2014 to then go through the transition experience that we're going to explore today.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, an amazing career. And of course, and somewhere we might go later on is I've actually served with you, and in a decent high profile operation as well, which was, we had some hairy times then, I remember. Certainly I remember one Sunday morning when it was just me and you and the whole world was falling apart. But maybe we'll talk about that. But your career, so it started all those years ago, although we won't tell them when, but it ended in 2014. What kind of, apart from the Royal Signals, what else did you do? Because I know that you went off and done some kind of more specialist stuff.
Yeah, so that relationship, as I say, is that I sort of look for the more sort of peripheral opportunities within the Royal Signals. Having initially sort of tried to transfer a bit of a brick wall, I decided to sort of see where I could go with what was on offer. So I initially joined Airborne Forces from training, and did a stint with them, and then after 4 years or so, I then moved across and went to Commando Forces and was there for, I think, in around 7 years, 6, 7 years. And those two sort of experiences were the ones that sort of shaped the path I took in terms of my career then, other than the usual sort of dipping in and dipping out of some Royal Signals posts, which the Signals felt I needed to do. I sort of tried to keep going back to training and development roles. So I did work with the university officer training side of things. I worked with the reserves. I am living in Harrogate, and I worked here in Harrogate, the Army Foundation College, as a training officer for one of the training companies. And then ultimately my last job, before I decided to call it a day, was within the collective training group down at Warminster, running bowman training. So I did an awful lot of all arms posts and occasionally came by to Royal Signals. So nobody knows who I am.
No one whatsoever in the Royal Signals.
No, not really, no.
No, I know that we've spoke about that before, and we've actually often laughed about that kind of stuff. But clearly at the end of all of that time, you came across the transition. Let's call it the last 12 months or whatever you want to call it. How did that kind of feel to you? How did that go personally?
Well, I think what we'll find is that experience has actually shaped what I now do, and has led me to what I do, because it was actually a really challenging chapter in my life. I left at a time when I still had time left on my contract, but
Right.
I was unwell physically. I was unwell mentally. I was exhausted actually by a lot of things that had gone on, and so my decision to leave was driven by a necessity for it to end rather than a desire to do anything new. And because of that, I'd really failed to prepare in an appropriate way. So I knew I needed to leave, and I sort of naively thought for all those years that by the time that happened, the future would sort of reveal itself,
Mm-hmm.
and it didn't, and that was a real problem for me. So superficially, if you looked at my sort of LinkedIn profile, if anybody's curious enough to do that, it looks quite fine. You know, I had a change of position maybe, but ultimately I carried on in training and development, coaching, leadership and management. But underneath the waterline, it was a very different experience. It's really challenging chapter, which I
Yeah.
struggled to understand fully at the time.
Do you think that was personally, or do you think that was because, or was the things in place you didn't use, or was the military helping you leave? What was the process like for you, i.e., the process that's available?
The process that was there in terms of the sort of resettlement window that opened for me, you know, I had the full entitlement. It it didn't work for me, and the reason it didn't work for me is because I didn't present them with a picture that I wanted to pursue.
Yes.
And so when I went on my transition workshop, and everything I attended was really well delivered.
Yeah.
There's no question about that. But in my case, there was a sort of rule of thirds almost in the room. There were a third of people in the room who had arrived with a plan. And the longer I was in their company, the more irritated I became in myself, because they clearly, whether they ever did what they said they set out to do, but they had a direction of travel, and they were engaged in that sector, whether it was oil and gas, whether it was health and safety, whatever it was, they had, you know, researched it, they got a direction, they were excited by it.
Mm.
There was a third, because of the length of time I'd served, that were in a position where resettlement was a bit of a curiosity, because they had circumstances to return to, whether it's financially, family, or whatever, that didn't really cause them any immediate concern. So this was sort of something to do. And the final third was the third I found myself in, which at that time there were quite a spectrum of young serving people who were exhausted by the cycle of operations, and myself maybe at the older end of that just thought, you know, I can't do this anymore, but I don't know what else it is I can do.
Right.
And that was the third that for me it didn't work for,
Yeah.
because I couldn't identify what it is I either wanted to do next, or actually, by virtue of the fact I'd been in the military for 35 years, joining at 16, I didn't know what the civilian landscape really was like. So that the nearer it came to leaving, the more alarmed I became by just a complete lack of direction.
Yeah.
But as I say, if you look at my profile, that would tell you a very different story, which
Yeah.
is the above the waterline and what's happening in reality.
Yeah. It's much the same as what happened to me, really. Um, I think many people blame, if you want to call it the end, you know, the end process, CTW. I didn't necessarily, I didn't blame them. I did at the time, I think, because I didn't know anything else. But the more and more I've looked at that, and the more and more I think about that, actually the problem was me. And we've got to get that information out more. And of course, we'll probably speak a little bit more about that as we go through. And
Yeah,
people often ask me, should I not bother doing it? And my answer to that is 100% you should.
yeah,
You
definitely.
should do as many things as you can, because there's a golden nugget everywhere. But
Yeah,
personally, I went through the same thing. So it was kind of that confusing moment of, well, I've just done that. Where do I go with this? Or what am I
yeah,
supposed to do next? And that was the problem. And I think some of those things are common traits that we're seeing. So there's a sticking point somewhere there where you can have the best process in the world, but if the people aren't prepared to go there and understand it, or don't already understand it, then there's a big problem,
yeah,
because in
yeah.
3 days you can do very little.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't present them with the opportunity to do the right thing for me because I
Yeah.
turned up unprepared. I did have a plan, and interestingly, that actually is what I ended up doing. But I had to try a few different lines and a few different avenues before I arrived ultimately at what I do now. But
Yeah.
and yeah, so I think you'll probably ask about that. But yeah, so the resettlement process was well delivered, well executed in military terms, and was really impactful for those that had arrived. At the time I did it, it may have changed, but at the time I did it, but those who had arrived with a direction of travel, whether they ever did it or not, but there was an energy behind them and a focus behind them and a purpose to writing a CV in a particular way and a networking opportunity that could be explored through the workshops that I was just staring at a blank wall,
Yeah.
literally just thinking, I have no idea what to do.
Yeah. Which, and that brings us nicely to, as you left and you had left, um, and clearly, I'd been out a little bit, before that. All of a sudden, I started the Forces Transition Group, which you showed a lot of support in for us and things like that. So I naturally navigated back to somebody that I trusted, believed in. Call it the military dad, if you want. And
I have a
you
number of
actually,
sons.
after leaving and went into what you were doing, did some consultancy work for us.
Yeah.
And it was all around this JSP 100. And we have to credit, and probably owe you a camper van because of this, and we discuss that all the time as well. That JSP 100 was written many years ago, and it was really a good formula. How did you find that consultancy work, and what did you think of JSP 100 and the structure behind that, or the process?
It was really interesting. It was a great opportunity to work with you. I was sort of it was during the furloughed period of the COVID, uh, but it was a really good opportunity to look at the landscape that you were setting the FTG up to operate in, to look at what it was you were seeking to do and where that might sit and who might be involved with that.
Yeah,
But also, how did that align to the changes that were taking place within the MOD with regards to their appetite and attitude to transition? So I can talk about this because I do this sort of side of things in the job that I do now. But the Ashcroft review in 2014 advocated that a through life education process that prepared people to leave was a really positive thing for the armed forces because ultimately it better prepared people to leave. But actually, the more confident they were about that, the more likely some of them were to stay, which is how our first sort of strap line of serve well came from, because the suspicion in when I was serving about any sort of initiative about transition was always about encouraging people to leave, showing people that the grass is greener, which it's not. We are both, I suppose, adverts for long careers. You had a full career and finished, in the rank of warrant officer and regimental assault major. I enjoyed a full career. So there's no question about this is about trying to accelerate departure. But if you don't recognise the opportunity that the service is in terms of education, financial support, how you can develop a profile in service that can launch you after service, then it's a bit meaningless. It's suddenly going on the resettlement package with sometimes very limited entitlement by injury, illness, or circumstance. It's too late. It's too late. And I strongly believe that the best advert for a career in the armed forces is someone who's successful after it and possibly as a consequence of it, because they're the ambassadors in wider society. So what we tried to do is look at the JSP 100. What were they seeking to do? And I've got some bits and pieces written down here, and it recognised in the policy that by having an effective transition process and education, it better prepared people. it gave greater awareness of people's value in a wider context.
Yeah.
And it meant that people and their families, principally, and their families, who are a wonderful source that are rarely or all too rarely recognised, can offer wider society once they leave. So the JSP was an open door for you, but I don't know how much has happened since. And Ashcroft's report basically says you need to be doing this. Get people ready to leave, because I think, is it Branson says, train them up to leave so that they want to stay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, it's 10 years on since then.
I know.
Or just about 10 years on since then, and it's kind of, if I'm open and honest, which I always am, I don't really see any change. I know there's things going on, and I hear things that are going on, and I speak to a lot of people who say there's things going on. Now, I know there's a lot of change going on at the minute, which might really enhance that. I'm not convinced that the following JSP 100, though, service people who I speak to through service and leaving are not aware of hardly of it, for starters, and commanders I speak to have never read it.
Yeah.
Now that probably tells me what I'll want to know. And it's a really scary thought. It's interesting, some of the things you picked up on there with the education. I didn't educate myself. I did at the end. Well, yeah. That means I had no hold on it. I didn't really know how to use it. The financial piece, I did no financial piece. Apart from at the end, someone gave me a pension and I somehow managed to buy a house.
Yeah.
And then the family thing. I put my family second, just like I did in the military.
See,
that's what we're supposed to do.
Yeah, the needs of the mission come before personal interest, but ultimately that it's interesting now looking back on actually what it is you asked of the people around you, and maybe you didn't even realize, because that was the deal. You're so focused on what you're doing. I mean, the work I do now is very much explores, how service shapes us in a particular way, necessarily to be successful in what is quite a unique community.
Yeah.
But that's a different way to exist than is required of you when you leave, which is, again, preparing to leave, understanding what's coming next, and there's this thing called push-pull factors. So ultimately, the very things that pull you into service, the excitement, the variation, the physicality, the unpredictability, are often the very things that end up being the reasons you leave, because you're in a relationship, you can't sustain it, you're asking too much of other people. But sometimes you can be so focused on needing to leave, which is what I did, that you actually haven't prepared to land in this new place, which is very different in so many different ways. So preparing, regularly reviewing why you're there and thinking about leaving, I think is a healthy thing.
Yeah.
Because the reason I was there at 51 was very different to the reason I was there at 18. Otherwise, I'd be quite a strange sort of kind of guy. So, but it was the financial, and you mentioned financial. A soldier today, and I use soldier because our background's army, can be on a wage which is equal to or above the national average salary, probably within 18 months to 2 years. So they've come from the areas that we've always traditionally recruited from, with a background that may not have allowed them to be in family groups that are enjoying that level of income. And all of a sudden they've got an income, but they've got no education because we don't provide it. And so that opportunity for social mobility that's often referred to as an offer within the armed forces experience can't be capitalized on if there's no education. So like you say, your pension, I ended up having my horoscope read by a financial advisor who I work with the reserves in the officer training, who said, do you know the value of what you've got? And I said, well, no. And that was as an RSM. I didn't know. I didn't really understand its commercial comparison or its commercial or its wider value. So how could I compare what I got to what I thought I was being offered?
Yeah.
So education is key. It's got to be.
Yeah. Well, I think if the RSM doesn't understand his pension, you probably know where the rest of the regiment is.
I knew what I was getting, and I knew when I get it, and I knew what scheme I was in, and I knew I thought I knew the advantages between staying in one and opting for the other, but in terms of its value in a wider context, how was I comparing a job with British Telecom, a job with Vodafone, with
Yeah.
what it was I was doing now, if I didn't really understand the worth of the package that I'd currently got? Well, I didn't, because nobody'd ever explain it to me,
Well,
and I've never been a working age civilian.
and that's an interesting thing, because I put this question out once and I got hammered for it by a lot of people. So I said that the education on finance needs to be much better in the military. And what I got back from that, from veterans, ex-forces, from civies, is, well, nobody else gets that. And it's kind of like, yeah, but you take people in the military being taken away from a family unit where they may learn that at some point the military is really their family. And if you don't keep teaching them and don't keep giving them that education, then they'll just keep wandering through their service until one day they leave with no information or understanding of anything.
I think it just goes hand in glove. I can understand why people say, well, nobody else gets it. I get that, but ultimately, what we're advocating, or what the forces is talking about, is its opportunity for social mobility. And social mobility can only truly occur if it's mapped to opportunity and education. So the opportunity's there, but the education to capitalize on it, which is often delivered maybe when you get it by somebody who's ultimately trying to sell you something, rather than somebody who's simply trying to, upskill you in how to manage your affairs, is not currently there on a wide scale.
Yeah.
I don't believe, anyway.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you've ever seen my video, but I've done a video on what I call the box. So I just draw a simple box and I say, this is your service. This service might be 2 years, it might be 4 years, might be 10, might be 30. But inside that box is your service. But the box, for many people, remains clear. So they do nothing. And then all of a sudden you draw this little tiny line on the end of it. That's your transition. But ultimately, what we're talking about here with JSP 100 is, if you take this little line here, that still needs to be there because we still need to show support. But if we do a lot of this stuff here in this side of this box, and this box is then filled with information and education and everything that I've got the opportunity to do, the end will just be so much easier. And really, it comes down to this box. And it's as simple as that. You can have a policy with 80, 90 pages in, but it comes back to making sure everyone understands in this area here.
Yeah.
But I could talk about this all day, as you well know, and I'm sure you could as well. But you've had some interesting roles, and I know you might, kind of mention them and things like that. But what's your role now? It's really interesting. Again, it's something that we hope to synergize with you around.
So I now work. I've got a number of sort of irons in the fire, really. I work at York St John University as a member of a team that delivers a program called the Military Human. The Military Human is a project that was developed by a guy called Nick Wood, who's also ex-military. He's Navy, which I forgive him for, but he was Fleet Air Arm. And he served for about 6 to 8 years, I think, and then when he left, he went and worked in the prison service. And he's the architect of a project called Veterans in Custody, which is still running today. And so he joined York St John University, and he created this project, the Military Human, which was commissioned by the NHS so that they could better understand and engage with the military community. Because of this obstacle, this barrier when you're in service, about what's the point in speaking to them? They won't understand me. They don't understand our lifestyle, our culture, what my life's like. So the NHS decided they wanted to address that by commissioning this project, which was originally called Veterans Awareness, but that shone a light on all sorts of issues as to whether people do or don't want to be regarded as veterans, and how the NHS saw veterans, which was old people. Well, you can be a veteran after 1 day's service. So this changed over time to the Military Human, which is a program which supports principally service providers understand the construct of military society, the military community, and the experience that then will take place for everyone of transition and adjustment at the end of service.
Yeah.
it's evolved recently to work with a few employers who want to better understand their target market when it comes to military recruitment, and maybe shape their onboarding process in a way that has changed because of one of the conversations we've had, and possibly for service leavers, which is something we're in discussion with, in terms of preparing people upstream for an experience which is individual, it's subjective. You may have loved it, I may have loathed it, but if nobody warns you that it can be bumpy, and what you may experience, you haven't got anything to hang that feeling onto that normalizes it. Because change happens in everybody's life for different reasons, whether it's change of job, change of location, change in relationship. But this is probably the biggest change that anybody can undertake in terms of your family's involved, your children's involved, medical care, dental care, spouse's employment, your employment, somewhere to live. It's huge, huge. And it emotionally can be really, really difficult.
Yeah, that emotion's mad. And it's something, you know, clearly I know Nick quite well, and it's something that we need to get better at. And I will be talking to Nick soon. I think if you guys get this inside the military as the norm, that's going to be pretty amazing. And
yeah,
if someone like me, who deals with many companies who are clearly working with or wanting service leavers because it's top talent, if we can say to our partners, well, this is what you should use as part of our partnership to understand these people and keep them, then we should be using this program. So do you feel that there is a synergy there between us, the FTG, and yourself, so we can try to bring that together?
I do, yeah, I do. I think obviously the employer piece is making sure that the project evolves to suit being an employer focused package, because
Yeah.
the first thing is, it's really interesting that actually a lot of people who we speak to or provide the workshop to work in military charity sectors, the healthcare sector, because it's service providers, people are wanting to lean in to the armed forces community, both those serving their families and those who are ex-forces, the veterans community. But of course, there's quite a lot of people in those groups that are ex-forces themselves. You know, there's 6 million people in society that are former armed forces or connected to it in one way or another. So it's quite interesting the number of people who speak to you after and say, wish somebody told me that, because I now understand more about me and what that experience was all about. So yes, I do think there's a place for it. I think it's something that the service leaver themselves, we did a presentation recently, and there were some service leavers in the process of leaving, and 2 of which at the end of it said, I'm not ready to leave. I haven't really thought about this. I've thought about why I want to go, but I haven't thought about, am I prepared for everything that landing well requires? You know, that flourish in the 3 elements: serve well, leave well. Well, they weren't going to leave well because they hadn't prepared adequately for it. They just didn't know. They just knew they didn't want to do what they were doing anymore. So I work in the charity sector as well as a coach. And so again, you sort of see the other end of the spectrum where people are sort of, there's a lot of investment by a lot of sectors, but that's in a sort of putting things right space. So putting it on the table before people leave, even if people don't think they need it, it normalizes it and it opens it up for people to have a conversation. You could have phoned me up all those years ago and said, did you feel odd about this? Did this sort of freak you out a bit? And we would have been all right chatting about it because it was out there. But when you think it's only you get, all these cliches, I just need to get on with it. I'm just having a wobble. I need to man up, and all these rubbish things that are not very helpful. But we do it, don't we?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I speak to lots of companies. I know there's a few who you're working with, who we work with, and stuff like that. That's all amazing. And I was speaking to a big company only last week who've just signed a contract in Amy, which clearly you'll know who they are. and they're really interested. So we're looking to need to speak to Nick soon, and clearly we will. But 4 years on, after your strap line, serve well, leave well, and flourish, which has been fantastic, and it's been alongside the hunter, the thing that's stuck.
Yeah.
It's pretty easy to get, pretty easy to understand. It doesn't take too many brains to go, all right, I understand that. It's the same with that hunter mentality. It's very, very quickly picked up on, and it sticks in your mind. How do you see what we're doing now? The growth from the original consultancy work you did, maybe looking at what JSP 100 means and what we're trying to do. How are you seeing us now from the outside? Because clearly you're seeing, it's not like we have a conversation every day.
Yeah, yeah.
What you're seeing?
To be honest, I think what's been achieved and what you have achieved individually has been remarkable, to be honest, because clearly there's an appetite. I think you've got 25,000 followers now, somewhere in the region, if not more. The significant one of the things we discussed in that consultancy period was about data capture. I got told many years ago, if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist. So ultimately, we had that conversation, and so the statistics of the appetite for what you do, I think, are the argument made. I think where maybe there was some nervousness about your intent and this sort of, the old, I went through a chapter in, I think, early 2000s when there was literally recruiting caravans outside of some of the camps that were recruiting directly. And I think there was understandably a nervousness about losing people in that way. But this is not what this is about. This is about, making sure people recognize what they've got, prepare for what's coming next, because I was told there's two things in life: death and taxes. Well, if you cross that threshold of any training establishment in the armed forces, there's death, taxes, and transition. So prepare for it, or it'll slap you in the face, including the tax bill. So prepare for it. Value what you've got, because service life is phenomenal. It's the greatest chapter of life. You're young, it's exciting, you can explore, you can learn, you can diversify. And I did some phenomenal things as a fringe member of some really interesting groups of people, and it was brilliant. So don't rush out the door without really taking stock of what you've got. And then that leave well is about preparing the ground and everything else. And the flourish it's back to Ashcroft's intent, which is, the best advocate for a career in the armed forces is somebody sitting in the room where everybody says, who's that? Where have they learned that from? And people knowing how to transition well by learning how to apply what they've learned in what is quite a unique cultural environment, knowing when it fits, knowing when to just ease back on it a little bit, knowing when to sort of pull out the ace in the hole and say, look, I know how to do this. Mm-hmm. But really flourishing in a way that not only attracts people potentially into the armed forces, but look at the reserve community and the contribution the reserves made through those sort of really hectic operational experiences, particularly in the medical arena. I mean, across the board, but the medic side of things, the NHS made a massive contribution.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, the best thing you want is somebody sitting in a room where people are going, who's that? Where have they got that from? And that's what we mean by flourish, because Civvy Street is all right.
Yeah.
It's hard and it's unpredictable. I'm finding that now, even my own circumstances are changing, but and they have, over the time I've been out, but it's all right. There's opportunity there, and there's opportunity to grow from what you do in service and continue to do that.
Yeah. No, it's fantastic. I mean, I think we talk about the golden nuggets. I think a lot of that's in there. But if you were going to pinpoint three really, quick, to the point golden nuggets that every service leaver could take into that transition, what would they be?
I'm going to default to a coaching sort of setup in. these are basically things I didn't do, so that's why I can't be I'm a bit of a hypocrite, but it's this hard experience. So one is have a chat with yourself, and a mate of mine calls it an appointment with myself, and it's actually put it in your diary, sit down. What is it you like to do? What is it you like to do? What makes you tick? What is it that excites you? Maybe about what you do now, or excited you. You know, when was the best job you've had in service? What were the bits in it? And if you can't do that, we use a thing like ranging questions, which is if you work out what you don't want to do.
Mm-hmm.
That would have been helpful to me. And the ranging questions are simple things like indoors, outdoors, near or far away, in a team, leading a team, a novelty, so you do something different every day, familiar, so you've got a routine. You know, what are they? Because basically find out what it is you don't want to do, because you can get rid of a whole lot of stuff. So that's the first thing, is make time to be honest with yourself that transition is going to happen. What do you want to do with it to make it good? So that's the first thing, is develop self-awareness is the coaching thing. The next thing is your strap line, become the hunter, take ownership. Nobody is going to do this for you. You know, you might think your mate's going to offer you a job, you might have family connections, but what do you want the next chapter to be about? So be the hunter, take ownership, engage with the section, a sector that you think you want to be in, whether it's through LinkedIn, you know, jobs forums, actual physical meetings, you know, learn about it whilst you're in a space that you still got a salary, you got a roof over your head. So become the hunter, learn the language, so that when you then get to this next bit, which is about performance, you've got an elevator pitch. You've got something that you can say to somebody who says, all right, Mick, what is it you're looking for? Are you leaving? You've got 3 months to go. What sort of thing have you got in mind? You've got the absolute clear message, which is what we did together in terms of the Forces Transition Group. Who are you? What are you? How are you going to do that? And when do you want to do it by? And that's what we set out to do. So prepare, own it, take ownership and be a hunter, and then basically practice and polish the elevator pitch. I didn't do any of those.
Yeah. Plan, own, practice. I always break it down into 3 words.
Yeah.
Acronym of POP, that one. But it's a really interesting piece for service people, because I always get asked about the golden nugget. People sometimes, if they've only got 5 minutes, they'll skip to the end to find out what the 3 main nuggets are from somebody who's been
the one thing, just a little pearl really, which is maybe taking me into credit, because that's the 4th one, is understand the difference between, because when I worked in the personal recovery centre for a military charity, and I used to work with service leavers who were being discharged through injury or illness, and in many cases this was a shock, and understandably a shock, and there was a period of denial where this is not going to happen, so I'm not really going to get too invested in this transition stuff, because I'll go back to battalion, or I'll go back to my RAF station or whatever, until it became a reality. And the thing then is work out what makes you tick is really important, because otherwise we get a herd mentality. I'd hear my mate works in Nissan doing car batteries. So, okay, so you're interested in battery technology? No, not really. So you're interested in a Nissan Micra then? No, not really, but my mate does it and he gets 20 grand. Well, yes, go and do it if you need to, because you got to put a roof over your head. It can be a bridge. But if it doesn't make you happy, you ain't going to be long before you're looking for another job.
Yeah.
So that intrinsic reward is the buzz you get from doing something you care about. You can't get that in any other way. Now, that's a luxury. I was able to look for something that was going to make me happy because of the length of service I did. And everybody can't do that. But if you can work out what makes you tick, I mean, it's the old adage, you know, if you find something you love to do, you never work another day in your life. You know, that's true. It's true. Where does it come from? It's true. So, you know, work out who you are and what you want to do and pursue that. Don't just follow the herd.
Yeah. And I'd reiterate that I'm so lucky now. as I wake up in the morning and I have no issues. And not only that, I've now brought my wife into it. So it is a big family thing. So it's fantastic. But Mick, I'm going to leave it there because I know you're a busy man. I also know there's lots of stuff going on in your life, so clearly we won't discuss that. But thank you so much for coming on.
You're welcome.
What you did for me through service, clearly what you've done for me after service, and what you continue to do with your mentorship now for me is unrivaled. And you know, I would ask anybody to, if they wanted some real coaching or some real mentorship, to speak to you. But I just wanted to make a personal thank you to you, because you know, you have shaped a lot of things. Although I met you late in my life, that are now coming into fruition and actually working. So I need to, you know, personally thank you for that. So,
Thank you.
but you know, again, thanks for coming on. It's been absolutely invaluable. I'm sure lots of people are going to take so much away from this, and I've got no doubt we'll catch up again soon.
All right, take care, John. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you.
Take care. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's Project You, Project Me. Thanks for listening in. But remember, we have a Project You, Project Me guide to self-coaching, to self-belief, and it can all be downloaded on our website. We also do the 5 fundamentals: CVs, professional writing. We do brand, we do CPD, making sure you're going in the right direction. We're also looking at your elevation, giving you 2 times the chance to set up your interviews before your first actual interview. And also we look at your financial plan, massively important for your future, for you and your family. So why not come along? Have a look. What you got to lose? It's all free. Stay safe.